The Lepidopterist, published in BFS Horizons. It's going to be just a short excerpt from it, but if you want to read the rest of it, feel free to get the issue of BFS Horizons issue 11. So, The Lepidopterist, Lower Harvey, 1937. It was July. The air was heavy and sickly sweet with the scent of nectar. Heat rolled off the old house, which loomed over Josephine. Red bricks draped with climbing roses and ivy, and a cast iron weather vane. Home. Her heart beat faster as she stared up at the house. Josephine, after 3 years, had been summoned home from Oxford. Her mother was gravely ill and failing fast, according to the telegram she had received. She would not have returned for anything else. Josephine squared her shoulders and rang the bell. Her mother had answered the door, and Josephine froze. Her mother didn't look ill. She looked her usual self. She was a vision of small-town elegance in a floral print house dress, auburn hair in neatly arranged curls, white skin carefully powdered, and a bold red lipstick on a mouth set with a stern frown. Never ill at all, Josephine suspected, fear growing within her. She had slipped right into their trap. A butterfly, flown unwillingly into a net. "You are late," her mother said coldly. "You missed lunch." "The train," Josephine said, feeling strangled. "The train was delayed. Did you recover already?" Her mother pursed her lips. "I'm quite well now." She glanced inside, then down at Josephine, who was wearing loose beach pajama trousers and a light blouse. Josephine hadn't worried about her travelling clothes. She'd expected to find her mother in bed, and so had prioritised comfort. Her mother wrinkled her nose. "Dinner won't be until 6. I imagine you can manage until then. Would you at least spare your father a heart attack and dress properly for dinner?" Josephine suppressed a sigh. "These are travelling clothes, Mother." Her mother turned and headed inside the house. "This heat is unbearable," she muttered. It was as if she couldn't bring herself to look upon Josephine's face for long. A sickening thought struck Josephine. "Will George be at dinner?" she called out after her mother. Her mother didn't turn round, instead straightening a vase of flowers. "Your brother is away at work. He'll be back on Tuesday." Josephine sighed with relief. She might have to face her parents, but at least she could avoid George. George, who took delight in causing bruises and breaking things, who enjoyed ripping the wings off of butterflies simply because it made her cry as a child. He was mean to her as their father had been mean to him. She did not miss her brother. The air was tense. If they found out what she had been up to at university, her life would be over. Did they suspect? She couldn't be sure. She attempted not to think about it. Her mother disappeared off into the parlour, leaving Josephine hovering on the threshold of the door. She wondered whether to flee now, to run for the last train out of the little train station in Lower Harvey. She glanced at her wristwatch. It was already nearly 2, and on Sundays, the train stopped running at 2:30. Josephine hesitated, wondering if she might make it. A horrible sense of curiosity held her on the threshold. Perhaps her family had summoned her home to talk about her future. Josephine had, after all, just graduated. Perhaps they didn't have any idea about her taste. 3 years was a long time to be separated from family, even a family as cold and unfeeling as Josephine's. She picked up her suitcase, took a deep breath, and stepped over the threshold. The atmosphere inside was stale, despite the cheerful Art Nouveau printed wallpapers, intricate wrought iron banisters lining the stairs, and stained glass windows tinting the bright sunlight in hues of red and blue. The house was spotless, airless, unchanged since her childhood, as if frozen in time. Josephine ran the suitcase up to her bedroom. This too had been left untouched, but it felt strange and unfamiliar. It was Josephine who had changed, grown different from her taste as a girl. The things in this room were what younger Josephine had thought her mother would approve of. She had accepted over time that her mother would never be satisfied. Josephine was altogether something her mother had never approved of. Her hair was fiery red, not auburn, and cropped chin-length in a stylish new mode that would scandalise the small Sussex village. Josephine was tall and well-built instead of petite and curvaceous, and even as a child she had insisted on reading alone instead of being the young socialite her mother had attempted to raise. Josephine's ambition to become a lepidopterist had set her at odds with her parents, who thought that a girl having the ambition to become a scientific academic was unnatural. Her parents had been heartbroken when, 1 week earlier, Josephine had graduated with a degree from St Hilda's College, thinking that her marriage prospects were ruined. They had not watched her walk. Josephine looked around that old room. It smelt stale and heavy. Unlike the rest of the house, a small amount of dust had accumulated there. She flung open the windows, shook out the sheets, and then marvelled at the views. She had missed waking up and seeing the trees. Oxford was beautiful, but nothing compared to Harvey Woods. Still, the feeling of the house itched at her skin and pulled at the bottom of her stomach. She needed air. She needed to get out. Josephine grabbed a book from the shelf and dashed outside. She sat down in the shade of the willow next to the garden wall, which bordered the woods. She kept her back to the house, trying not to think about the trap. It was too late to catch the train now. Instead, she tried to focus on her book and the riot of colour around her. The garden had always felt otherworldly, especially when, as a child, she longed to be anywhere apart from Lower Harvey. Packed with delphiniums, lilies, dahlias, gardenias and hydrangeas, and carpeted with a blanket of wildflowers, it was easy to become lost in a sea of colour amongst the butterflies. A shiver ran down Josephine's spine. She glanced at the house, chill running through her despite the heat. She caught a glimpse of her mother's auburn hair in an upstairs window. Her mother quickly disappeared. Josephine attempted to shake off the feeling and tried to return to her book. Again, the nagging suspicion tugged at her, gnawing at her gut. Had they found out about those long sunny days in Oxford, lying on the college green with Elena? There were aspects to her life there that her family would never approve of. A butterfly landed on her nose, taking her by surprise. She smiled, delighted. The meadow brown flew off again, joining the multitude of other butterflies fluttering lazily through the air around her head. She watched them dance for a while, her vision filled with glimpses of orange, blue, white, and black. She admired the way the dust on their wings shimmered, and occasionally left the air glimmering as they flew. The butterflies had always made her feel free, even when she was drowning at home. Growing up, she had spent many hours among them, reading. She used to read aloud to them and rant about her day. There had always been one butterfly in particular that always returned to her side, resting on the edge of her books as she read. A red admiral, much larger than the normal, the span of her hand. She'd always called her Atalanta, after the Red Admiral's scientific name, Vanessa Atalanta. She used to talk to Atalanta, and Josephine used to think that Atalanta talked back. It was impossible, of course. Butterflies only live a month or so, and they certainly can't talk. She now understood these conversations with the imaginations of a lonely child. The butterflies were nervous at the garden, save for Atalanta, who appeared to keep her company as she read, and only when her brother was absent. No other red admirals ever came into the garden, not since her brother had started pulling the butterflies' wings off as they sunned themselves in the early mornings. Her brother knew exactly how much they loved these creatures. They'd argued again, and he'd done it despite her. When he had neared Atalanta, Josephine had snapped and drove him off by throwing rocks. It had ended with her arm broken. Their arguments had usually ended with her breaking something. The family had difficulty coming up with enough excuses to explain her injuries. But the Red Admiral and her friends had gotten safely away, and Josephine, battered and bruised, had been glad. Josephine sighed, the memory of the Red Admiral filling her with nostalgia for a friend long gone. She reopened her book, enjoying the sweet fragrance of the honeysuckle growing nearby, and settled in to read, her back resting against the willow. After a short while, the pleasant warmth of the sun on her face and the peaceful stillness of the garden began to make her feel drowsy. The hypnotic multicolored dance of the butterflies continued, and she began to doze. A flash of orange and black splashed on her page. Josephine blinked, surprised. Stuck against the black print on the white page was an unusually large red admiral, fluttering its wings. Josephine stared, hardly believing her eyes. She had not seen her friend in almost 3 years. It was impossible for a butterfly to live so long. Atalanta, she whispered, her head tight. The butterfly took off into the air, fluttering around. Josephine stood up quickly, determined to gain a closer look. The butterfly flitted away from her, just out of reach. Josephine frowned and stepped closer. The butterfly danced along the breeze, heading for the wall that separated the garden from the woods beyond. She followed, trying to see the butterfly better. She was almost prepared to swear it was her old friend. The butterfly flew over the wall, hovering just a few meters beyond, taunting her. Josephine paused and glanced down at the wall, which reached the height of her chest. She thought for a moment, then glanced at the butterfly once more. She climbed over the wall, her feet easily finding footholds in the rough stone. Wiping her hands, she followed the butterfly. The butterfly continued, deeper into the shadow of the woods. Josephine walked behind, intrigued by the butterfly's markings. "Wait for me," she called. The butterfly, of course, did not reply, only flew deeper into the woods. After a while, Josephine realised she had walked several miles, but she knew Harvey Woods well. She would not get lost in there. The butterfly vanished. Josephine could not help but feel a crushing sense of failure. She looked around and realised she was in a shadowy glade, filled with luscious foliage. She couldn't quite see the path that she had come by. She frowned. A glimpse of orange caught her attention, and she spun around, hoping to find the Red Admiral again. To her surprise, she found several Red Admirals, but not the larger, more vibrantly coloured one that she had been following. Beyond the butterfly, she caught a glimpse of something else between the trees. Soft, billowing cloths of orange, black, and white whirled around an ethereal figure. A woman stood there, spinning and swaying with the butterflies who flocked around her, dancing to music that only she and the Red Admirals could hear. Her skin was a rich red-brown, and her hair long and black, swirling in the air around her head, red and white beads knotted into the strands. Josephine moved closer, mesmerised. She was the most beautiful woman she had ever seen, and somehow familiar. Up close, she realised that the woman's bare feet only brushed the ground, and what she had mistaken for more cloth was actually two large butterfly wings extending from her back. Josephine stared, recognising the Red Admiral markings on her wings. "It's you," she breathed, transfixed. Atlanta opened her eyes and smiled at her. She held out her hand. "Dance with me?" So that's my story. I hope you enjoyed it.